The existence of Jesus of Nazareth, a figure central to Christianity, has been a subject of intense debate for centuries. While billions accept Jesus as the Son of God, a significant number of scholars and skeptics question his historicity. This debate is not merely a theological squabble. It delves into the heart of historical inquiry, challenging our understanding of the past and the very foundations of Christianity. The heart of this debate lies in the scarcity of contemporary historical evidence. Unlike prominent figures from antiquity such as Julius Caesar or Augustus, Jesus left behind no writings, nor are there first-hand accounts of his life. This lack of direct evidence has fueled skepticism, leading some to argue that Jesus is a mythical figure, a product of early Christian imagination. On the other hand, proponents of Jesus' historicity point to the New Testament Gospels and a handful of non-Christian sources as evidence for his existence. They argue that while the evidence might be limited, it is sufficient to establish Jesus as a historical figure who lived and preached in first-century Palestine. The question of Jesus' existence is not one that can be easily resolved. It requires a careful examination of the available evidence, both biblical and extra-biblical, and a nuanced understanding of the historical context in which Jesus lived. The primary sources of information about Jesus are the four canonical Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These texts, written decades after Jesus' death, provide narratives of his life, teachings, miracles, death, and resurrection. However, the Gospels are not simply biographical accounts. They are theological documents written to spread the Christian message. Scholars recognize that the Gospels are not always historically accurate. They contain inconsistencies, contradictions, and supernatural elements that raise questions about their reliability as historical sources. For instance, the accounts of Jesus' birth differ significantly between Matthew and Luke, and the miracles attributed to him defy natural laws. Despite these limitations, the Gospels should not be dismissed entirely as historical sources. They preserve valuable information about the social, cultural, and religious milieu of first-century Palestine. Moreover, certain details within the Gospels, such as the names of individuals and places, have been corroborated by archaeological and historical evidence. The challenge for historians is to sift through the theological layers of the Gospels to extract potential historical kernels. By comparing the different Gospel accounts, analyzing their literary styles, and considering the historical context, scholars attempt to reconstruct a plausible picture of the historical Jesus. Outside the New Testament, references to Jesus are scarce but significant. Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius mention early Christians and their persecution under Nero, indirectly confirming the existence of Jesus. Josephus, a Jewish historian, provides a more direct reference to Jesus, although the authenticity of this passage, known as the Testimonium Flavianum, is disputed. Tacitus, in his Annals, describes Nero's scapegoating of Christians for the fire in Rome in 64 CE, mentioning Christus, from whom they derived their name. Suetonius, in his biography of Claudius, refers to the expulsion of Jews from Rome, mentioning disturbances caused by Chrestus, possibly a misspelling of Christus. Josephus, in his Antiquities of the Jews, includes a passage that describes Jesus as a wise man and a worker of miracles, crucified under Pontius Pilate. However, many scholars believe that this passage, the Testimonium Flavianum, was later altered by Christian scribes to make it more favorable to Jesus. While these non-Christian sources provide independent attestation of Jesus' existence, the brevity of their accounts and the controversies surrounding their authenticity leave room for debate. Nevertheless, they demonstrate that early Christians were a known group in the Roman Empire and that their origins were traced back to Jesus. Section 4. Echoes of Myths, Jesus, and Other Ancient Deities. Some scholars, known as mythicists, propose that Jesus never existed as a historical figure but is instead a mythological construct, drawing parallels between his story and those of other ancient deities like Horus, Mithras, and Krishna. They point to common motifs in these myths, such as virgin births, miracles, and resurrection, arguing that Christianity borrowed these elements from earlier pagan traditions. For example, Horus, the Egyptian god of kingship, was believed to be born of a virgin goddess and resurrected after death. Mithras, a Persian deity worshipped in the Roman Empire, was associated with light, truth, and a cosmic battle between good and evil. Krishna, a central figure in Hinduism, is revered as an avatar of Vishnu and is said to have performed miracles and delivered spiritual teachings. Mythicists argue that the similarities between Jesus' story and these myths are too striking to be coincidental. They suggest that early Christians, influenced by prevailing religious ideas, crafted a narrative about Jesus that incorporated elements from these earlier traditions. While some parallels exist, most scholars reject the mythicist view, arguing that the similarities are superficial and that the differences between Jesus and these mythological figures are far more significant. They maintain that the historical and cultural context of first-century Palestine provides a more plausible explanation for the origins of Christianity. Section 5. The Great Debate: Historians versus Mythicists. The debate between historians and mythicists is often heated and polarized. Historians, while acknowledging the limitations of the evidence, generally accept the historicity of Jesus. They argue that the convergence of biblical and extra-biblical sources, coupled with the lack of any compelling evidence to the contrary, makes it reasonable to conclude that Jesus was a historical figure. Mythicists, on the other hand, remain unconvinced. They argue that the evidence for Jesus' existence is too flimsy and that the parallels with other ancient myths are too compelling to ignore. They maintain that the burden of proof lies with those who claim Jesus' historicity, and that until more conclusive evidence is found, the possibility of a mythical Jesus remains open. The debate between historians and mythicists highlights the challenges of reconstructing the past, particularly when dealing with limited and potentially biased sources. It also underscores the importance of critical thinking, open-mindedness, and a willingness to consider alternative perspectives. Section 6. The Quest for the Historical Jesus, a Scholarly Perspective. The quest for the historical Jesus has been a major scholarly endeavor for centuries. From the Enlightenment to the present day, historians and theologians have employed various methods and approaches to reconstruct a plausible picture of Jesus' life and teachings. One approach, known as the criterion of dissimilarity, focuses on sayings and actions attributed to Jesus that differ from both Judaism and early Christianity. The assumption is that such teachings are more likely to be authentic, as they would not have been invented by later followers. Another approach, the criterion of multiple attestation, prioritizes material found in multiple independent sources. The reasoning is that traditions appearing in different sources are more likely to be historically accurate, as they have a higher probability of originating from an earlier common source. Despite these efforts, the quest for the historical Jesus remains a complex and often contentious undertaking. The scarcity of evidence, the theological biases of the sources, and the subjective nature of historical interpretation make it difficult to arrive at definitive conclusions.